it's Enablement's role, I feel really strongly, to kind of sit in the middle there and align these teams around a common process and a common goal that is to drive the goals of the company and the business forward.
Sara D is the Global Director for Sales Enablement at Templify, and we had a short discussion prior to this interview. So let's jump in. So today we are going to talk about how do we motivate our reps? How do we create a collective team that are all on the same page, going towards the same direction? So Sara, what does a successful team mean to you?
A sales enablement team or sales team?
A sales enablement team, just to stay on topic.
So I think a successful sales enablement team to me is a group of passionate individuals who are passionate about enabling others and coaching others. They are cross-functional people. They want to talk to other people around the organization, build consensus. It's really important that they live, breathe, and understand the world of the sales reps that they support. So they understand what our customers need. They understand how the sales conversation looks like, feels like, and sounds like.
Cool. And how do you get everybody to kind of understand these processes and kind of, because people can have different perceptions coming into sales. I know I did. And trying to get everybody on the same page, how could you get everybody to kind of understand all of these processes in the same way?
I think onboarding is important, right? In enablement, we're responsible usually for onboarding the sales team, but onboarding enablement team members is just as important. Making sure that onboarding not only gives them fluency in the products that you're selling and who your buyers are and what's important to them, but also carving out a lot of time for them to spend with the sales team. Ideally, they should meet as many members of the sales team as possible. They should listen on their calls, go out on meetings, shadow them, so that they really get an understanding of what a sales conversation sounds like. And then making sure that they're meeting with and understanding how other areas of the organization impact what the sales team is doing. I mean, product impacts sales in a big way. They're working on great pieces of technology, new product, then needs to be taken out to our customers, while your client-facing team is how that happens along with marketing, and those things need to be aligned. And the enablement team needs to be the team that's aligning them.
Amazing. So alignment, I guess, is probably one of the biggest challenges in sales, just because in a sales team you have so many different segments. And you mentioned that communication is kind of key in getting to understand each other. So what do you think is like the biggest struggle when trying to align sales enablement with like the rest of the team?
I think everybody's got different goals, right? So the products team's goal is to get product out. The marketing team's goal is to communicate their message effectively or to get their content used to drive leads. So bringing those people with different goals together can be challenging, but that's Enablement's job. It's Enablement's job to say, hey, we really need to make sure we're communicating effectively with sales, that we're communicating the right information at the right time in context, that we're not just throwing random stuff at them that isn't in context. They need to understand the why we're doing what we're doing, the WIFM, the what's in it for me, in order to be effective and to use the resources that they're being given by marketing, to leverage the campaigns that marketing are producing, and to actually understand and sell the new product that product is putting out there. And it's Enablement's role, I feel really strongly, to kind of sit in the middle there and align these teams around a common process and a common goal that is to drive the goals of the company and the business forward. And to do that, this group of go-to-market people need to be on the same page. We need to be aligned on, hey, this is what our process, this is what it means when we say a piece of product is ready. This is what it means when a marketing campaign goes live. And this is how we communicate with sales, and make sure that enablement is owning that communication process, because communication is not something that should just be done randomly. It should be a well thought out strategic process that someone actually owns to make sure that information is going to the right place. And especially if you think about how sales reps need to be communicated with, they're very focused on hitting their number. They're very focused on that conversation they have today and being prepared for that demo or that conversation. They kind of live in the moment a little bit. So it's really important to give them information at the right time. And if you train them on something or give you the information that's not relevant to them at that moment in time, they're either going to not pay attention or they're going to forget about it. And if you give them the wrong amount of information or the wrong thing, they might latch on to what I call the shiny object. But if it's not communicated or trained effectively, it's not going to be effective for them to be focused on the shiny object, whatever it is. So I think it's really important that communication is well thought out and strategic with ownership.
Great. So the shiny object, what do you mean by the shiny object?
So there could be something. So for example, you could have sales could have, for example, been asking for a new product feature. So the product team builds it, but maybe they tell the sales team about it when it's not actually ready for them to sell, or training isn't built out yet. So now they're focused on this shiny piece of new awesome product functionality that they can't actually get their hands on yet. They can't actually demo it. They're not equipped to talk about it yet. They don't have any collateral messaging, but they've been told, here's a new shiny object. It's like one of my biggest pet peeves. It's kind of like, don't give them any shiny objects. Give them structured information that they can actually use in context.
Cool. Yeah, no, definitely. I think I've even experienced that when someone has shown me like what I could achieve, and then I kind of like jump before I can run, and I almost end up tripping over my own feet. Um, so like as a sales enabler, how have you kind of, I'm sure you've caught people like jumping for that shiny object, and how do you like reel them back in, like get them back into their rhythm, into their pace? Because I feel like that's such a struggle sometimes to come back from that.
Yeah, I think it's having good relationships. So as an enabler, building those really good cross-functional relationships, spending time with people, getting to know them, understanding where they're coming from and their goals, and becoming kind of like the sounding board for them, so that it becomes kind of a cadence of, hey, we're building this thing, we need to communicate it out to sales. What's the best way to do it? Instead of everybody running off and communicating with sales. Enablement kind of, I hate the word gatekeeper, but they kind of become the gatekeeper that strategically determines how, when, and what to communicate. And if you need to reel something back in, it's not a good conversation. And it means you haven't done a good job of building that deep cross-functional relationship that you need as an enabler to build.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So communication and building a relationship with your sales reps is super important, and almost like how would you measure, obviously like bar like mistakes and stuff happening, mistakes are always going to happen in sales reps, but how would you measure that good communication has been transferred between you and your sales rep?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that you can't measure tangibly, right? There's no quantitative
Right.
data on it. It's all qualitative. I think if they're using the messaging, for example, if they're using the resources that you rolled out, if when you listen into their calls, you can hear, oh yeah, the training stuck, the message stuck, and then having an open feedback loop. I do a couple of things. I have a regular monthly one-on-one with every sales leader to hear directly from them, hey, what's on your mind? What's going on in your team? Did this land? What else do we need to do? And then I meet with as many sales reps as I can, as often as I can. But that can be hard to do sometimes, depending how many sales reps you have.
Yeah, definitely. The one-to-one idea is actually really, really cool, because you kind of really get to, like, everybody's different, and you almost have to meet people one to one to kind of adapt to their own like learning strategies, because how else are you supposed to know unless you like are put face to face with that person. There's a lot of psychology behind that. um but let's say for like big companies that don't have that advantage, how could they how could they still manage to do something so so effective like that without
Uh,
having to do the one to one?
Yeah, well, I still think that as a sales enablement leader, you need to have that one-on-one with each of your sales leaders, no matter the size of your company. Maybe it's not monthly, maybe it's quarterly, depending on how many sales leaders you have. I think it's really, really important. Um, but then also things like team meetings. Me, else I like to do is have what I call a sales huddle, where it could be once a week, it could be bi-weekly, it could be once a month, depending on the company. We bring the entire sales team together and you share out good news. So some of the reps share out, hey, good things that happened this week. And then you share best practices, win stories, loss stories, and you use that time to communicate important information and to gather feedback.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I love that. It's kind of like the same analogy as you use for like a team sport. Like you have to imagine yourselves as like not like individual sales reps, but like all collectively working as a team towards the same goal, which is wanting to hit target and like helping each other and not being so siloed, which I feel like sometimes in sales, like we can all kind of feel very, because it's quite a competitive industry, like we can kind of all feel a bit against each other sometimes because we want to hit those numbers, which I think can play to our biggest downfall, because like we can all learn from each other. Everybody has like different qualities, so that's really nice to hear. Um, so you were talking about the like your amazing achievements, like you started an enablement from scratch 3 times, you said? Was it 3 times?
Yeah.
Um, from the moment that you started to now, how do you think like your philosophy has changed on enablement?
I definitely say it would progress. I mean, I've been in enablement a while. And when I
Mm-hmm.
started in enablement, it was an organic thing. It happened organically. I was in sales operations and I kind of started doing enablement. And then I had this awesome boss who pretty much pulled me aside and said, Sara, you're doing two jobs. You're not doing either of them well. So choose a path. And I chose enablement. And back then it was kind of enablement was really just starting. It wasn't really defined. It wasn't in a lot of organizations, and it was kind of like making up as you go along. And now, if you look around, it's really kind of progressed as a function. There's Sales Enablement Society, all kinds of sales enablement groups, and it's still a small community, but there is a community now. We can learn from each other. So it's less about kind of like making up as you go along kind of thing, and more kind of like there are now, like there's research out there, there's books out there are people you can talk to who've done the things that you're trying to do, and you can kind of standardize a little bit. I mean, every organization is different, especially from a sales and enablement perspective, and what they need depending on where they are in their stage of growth. I feel like it's more kind of a repeatable process now. It's kind of like there's this standard collection of things that an organization needs that's going to really impact their success if they can get it right, that enablement can drive. Whereas when I first started doing this, it was very much a not strategic function. It was very reactive. It was, okay, we need onboarding, enablement's going to do that. Well, we need training on this specific thing, enablement's going to do that. And it was very kind of tactical versus strategic. And I feel like it's become much more strategic as time has gone on.
Yeah, especially like in sales, people are so focused on like just doing to get something done, where like sometimes we forget to like take a step back and actually think, oh well, how are we going to do this? And I know it's so cheesy, but they always tell me, Ellie, if you fail to prepare, prepare to fail. Um, so I think that kind of relates to that. But if you were to use like three key standards for an enabler now to if you cover these three things as an enabler, you will see progression in your team, what would they be?
I think clearly define what is enablement for the organization you're working at. A lot of organizations define it differently, and really making sure you understand, hey, what is my mandate in enablement and who are my stakeholders? And making sure you kind of focus on that and don't drift into other areas, because it's very easy as an enabler to get kind of pulled into other areas of the business. And you're hired to, for example, um, enable sales, and next thing you know, customer success is creeping in there, but you don't actually have a mandate for it. Making sure that you've got executive buy-in for what that strategy is, and that the things you're working on align to the goals of the organization and to the sales team. There's no point in rolling out programs and working on things that can't be measured and that aren't aligned to the goals of the organization. And then I guess the third thing, really build those relationships with the sales team and with other areas of the business. You can't do enablement in a silo. It doesn't work.
Yeah, that's so true. And for like when you said, oh, I remember you saying just there that you were working as a sales ops, but you were doing enablement as well. And I feel like there's a lot of like interlink between the two. How like where does that link begin between sales ops and enablement?
I think in terms of kind of sales tools training, things like CRM training and testing out, right? So my experience in operations is operations responsible for the tools and the tech stack that sales are using. Usually the CRM is a key part of that, and making sure that, and CPQ and quoting tools and things like that. But sales operations people are awesome at building those things, keeping them running, maintaining those things, data and reporting. But when it comes to training sales team on how to use those things and getting adoption of them, it's not necessarily their wheelhouse. So I feel like that's where enablement really comes in and where that kind of intersection happens. And that's kind of how I ended up getting into enablement. I started doing training classes on our CRM system, and training classes on our CPQ. And that kind of blossomed out into training on our other tools and systems, and then training on how to have a sales conversation, and then product training. So it kind of grew from that kind of CRM training piece, for me specifically, from like operations into enablement.
Cool. So in sales, like how do you think enablement impacts like a business's total revenue? How would you say like what is the biggest impact on it?
I think it's hard to measure and say, hey, enablement had this direct impact, but there are
Yeah.
things you can look at. So you can look at ramp time and ramp targets for new hires, right? One of the things enablement can be measured on is, are you reducing ramp time? Are you increasing attainment of ramp quotas? If you implement a client ready certification as part of your onboarding, are your new hires considered client ready? Are they, able to apply the knowledge you've given them? And then other metrics you can impact through the programs you put together are win rate. Can you increase your win rate? You can do a lot of analysis into what's impacting win rate and then determine, well, these are the enablement programs that will help increase win rate. You can do the same thing for ACV. How can you increase ACV? Well, what's impacting ACV today, and what programs can you build out to improve it? Is it for example, is it a training on how to have a pricing conversation, and you can measure before that training happened and then afterwards? Is it something else? It could be the need for a process or a technology or a playbook or training or some other kind of program. So there are multiple kind of sales metrics that you can impact, but you can't say, hey, direct correlation, this changed because enablement did this. What you can do is measure those things on an ongoing basis and understand what you rolled out when and what the impact is, and measure that impact. And I mean, sales cycle time is the other thing. Like, what's our deal velocity? What's our velocity between stages? How do we improve that? And there's always things you can do once you look at the data and do some analysis of like, well, why are things stalling in this stage? Is it because we need to do better discovery? Is it because we need to be able to have a better type of conversation around pricing or implementation? And you can then roll out programs that are going to impact that and continue measuring it. And hopefully you'll see that number get better.
Yeah, that's really nice, Sarah, because like I feel that makes a lot of sense, because if you then train your sales reps properly in different segments, and you almost have like a knock-on effect, and it might not be direct, but it's still very impactful, so it's still just as important. um I know in my training, like the more I train, the more you train and the more strategically you build your team, like the better the outcome will be, not just in numbers, but like even in the whole atmosphere, the whole atmosphere between sales reps, the whole atmosphere between like leaders and everybody really. Like I think training is a really big part, not just in the numbers but in the whole business as a whole. So I love that. And so if you if you were to put a definition on enablement for you, how would you describe enablement?
Oh, that's a hard one. So many. I think in a nutshell, it's about equipping revenue generating teams with the tools, insights, resources, and processes and training that they need to be great at what they do, which is, booking new business, having great client conversations, retaining our clients. So I think it's about helping them be effective, and being the best version of themselves.
It's so positive. I love that so much. um and if you were to look back on when you started, what would you tell yourself? What would you tell your past self who just started in enablement?
Um, when asked if you're going to stay in sales operations or go into enablement because you're doing two jobs, say yes to enablement. I think it's been really interesting and challenging and awesome. And I think I tell myself to say yes and not hesitate. I wouldn't change the path I went on.
No, definitely not. And I feel like sales enablement is so interesting because there must be a lot of psychology behind enablement and like dealing with people. Can you explain a little bit more on that?
Yeah, and I actually find that really interesting, because if you think about how adults specifically learn, we don't learn the same way we learned things when we were younger, when we were in a school environment. Learning in the workplace, learning as an adult is very different. Our brains are wired very differently, and I think a lot of people don't realize that. So that's where communication needs to become strategic, where training needs to include reinforcement and the ability to apply your knowledge. We learn more from interacting with our peers and actually doing than we do from sitting in a classroom. I can never remember the numbers, but I think it's like you only learn 10% of whatever it is you're learning in a classroom setting. Everything else you learn and you're going to retain information better. You get it from your peers or from actually doing. And you need, when you get to a certain age, you need constant reinforcement or somewhere to go to remind yourself, because you might get trained on something. You know you were trained, you should know how to do it, but you can't remember. So you need a resource you can go back to that's easily referenceable. I think that's really important. And then I think also meeting people where they are. People learn differently. Some people learn great by watching a video and taking a quiz. Other people need to have a conversation about it and interact with someone in order to get things to stick. So I think that's really important as well, meeting people where they are, taking into consideration how much time they spend doing what types of activities to make sure they're learning what needs to be learned.
That's really interesting because yeah, like the psychology behind how like a child learns and how an adult learns is so different. Like we're much more forgetful. Our neurons aren't wired the same.
And,
we,
and like enablement's also about change management, and it can
yeah.
take, in order to change a behavior, you need to do something 30 times. So if you're taught something new and you need to change your behavior, in order to make that behavior change become part of your natural DNA way of doing something, you need to do it 30 times. That
That's a
takes
lot.
time and needs constant reinforcement, but you need to also do it in a way that's kind of, nice and not challenging and not kind of condescending, because you're teaching people and affecting change with people who are career professionals who know what they're doing. So you really need to meet them where they are.
And how do you know like what is like the threshold for challenging? Like how could you tell if you're, oh, I may be challenging that person a bit too much?
I think it really comes down to knowing the team and knowing the individuals. When you have people in a classroom setting, that's going to kind of come out pretty clearly.
Mm.
And if you're a good trainer, no matter what type of group of people you're training, sales or otherwise, you're going to be able to read the room and understand, hey, this group's not getting it, they're struggling. This group are way ahead, and you can pivot what you're doing. I like to leverage more knowledgeable or more advanced people. If I have a group of more senior reps who know the product really well, know the company and the industry really well, instead of me or a member of my team standing up there teaching, I'll bring them in to support teaching, to give that their voice, because they're the voice of the sales team. I like to do a lot of panels where they sit there and we kind of get stories out of them and then open it up to questions from the rest of their peers. I like to have them kind of come up and tell their story about how they did something as an example, and kind of help the rest of the team see what it can be, and how to apply it by hearing their stories directly, because it's much more powerful to hear from their peers than it is to hear from me or a member of my team.
Yeah, people really do love to feel like they can relate to someone. I feel like people learn quicker uh from other people that they feel they can relate to. I think that's a huge thing. I think that's a huge thing, especially like let's say I don't know, when I hear a success story from one of my other like sales reps, from another sales reps or from another person in the community, I'd be like, "Oh yeah, I can do that one day." But if I hear like a success story from like I don't know, somebody in enablement, I'd be like, well, I could never do that. Like, and I just get a little bit pressured, and then it makes me feel like a bit more, oh, I don't know, and a little bit more insecure. So I think that's a really good strategy. Get people in front of you that you feel like that they can relate to, and show them like you're able. It's very positive, and I feel like you're really all about like the positive psychology kind of side of enablement. But yeah, no, that's very cool. And so one last question to wrap this all up. If you were to stand in front of a board of other enablement leaders, what would you tell them?
That's a tough question. I don't know necessarily I would tell them anything. I might just ask them tons of questions, right? Because
What would you ask them?
I still have a lot to learn. I think there are things that keep me up at night. And if I could get a room of sales enablement leaders in the room, I'd be like, oh, have you done this? I think it would become more of a, not me telling them, but more of a collaborative, have you done this? How have you done this kind of discussion?
I love that. And what would you ask them? What would be like your most like, oh, I'd love to know that.
Oh, how do you measure and demonstrate the impact of enablement? It's something that I think all enablers struggle with, and there are many different approaches. And I don't feel like I've actually 100% cracked that nut yet. And it's like the thing I'm constantly talking to other enablement people about, like, how do you do that? I know I can impact this metric and I can measure it like this, but how do I demonstrate that impact? What else should I be measuring? That's like the big thing that keeps me up at night.
I guess we're always learning, and I suppose from studying psychology, like I've learned that not everything can be measured quantitatively. Sometimes there's an art in the qualitative aspect. You get to be a little bit more creative, you get to be a little bit more intuitive, and you get to learn your team a little bit more. So, but like numbers are very important, but I think it's just as important to keep that qualitative aspect of, not everything can be measured, and we are humans at the end of the day. We're a very complex species with our own needs. So yeah, it's nice to have that balance, and it's good to find that balance. But you know, maybe we will have a metric for what sales enablement is someday. Let me know because I'd love to learn.
I'm very data driven and number driven and process driven, so I like want the answer. But I don't.
Yeah. Yeah, like listen, like there is such a huge power in numbers. Um, it's how we can track progress and it's how we can forecast it. Like numbers are actually very valuable, but I love the fact that you also bring in that personable aspect as well. Because I think that's super important too. I love to see it.